Our third week of taking a look at people in the Bible who were really, truly heroes. Were people who made a huge difference, but we don't hear about them as much as some of the big names. You know, as we always hear about Moses, we always hear about Moses as the one who led people out of slavery into the promised land. And we tend to forget that most of the time when Moses is mentioned in the book of Exodus, it's Moses and Aaron. It's always and Aaron. Because Moses never would have gotten very far without his older brother to help speak for him, to help lead with him. So we talked about Aaron. Aaron as the original sidekick. The sidekick who helped lead God's people into freedom. And last week we talked about Gideon, another person that doesn't come up a whole lot in worship services. Doubting Gideon, because remember, doubting Gideon he's really the poster child for doubting in the Bible. Thomas has nothing on Gideon. You know, God was trying to invite Gideon to lead the army to set the people free from their oppressors, and he needed tons of proof. God, can you make the fleece wet and the ground dry? Sure, got you, Gideon. Well, how about if we make the fleece dry and the ground wet? Can we do that? He needed a lot of reassurance. But the good news for us is that God gave him that reassurance, and he was able to do what God called him to do. And today we have perhaps the most unlikely hero in the ancient world, a young woman. A young woman who is a minority in a huge empire. A Jew living in the capital of Persia. It would be hard to imagine someone with less power. But Esther is in a place. She is in a position where she is able to save her whole people. Now you need to know a little bit about the background of this story to really get the full impact of what Esther is able to do. So King Ahasuerus, also known as Artaxerxes, he is the king of the biggest empire on the planet at the time. It goes from India to Libya, across Asia Minor, what's now Turkey. And Artaxerxes, he wants to pummel the Greeks. This is his thing. His ancestors had tried to defeat the Greeks, and you might remember some of those stories from history. You know, the Battle of Marathon, where the Greek guy ran 26 miles, and that's why marathon's 26 miles. You might remember the Thermopylae, you know, the Spartans, the 300 Spartans that held off the army. Well, Artaxerxes is out for vengeance. And so he sends 250,000 men to the Strait of the Bosporus that connects the shortest distance between Asia Minor and Greece. He has some of his engineers build a bridge to get the troops across. A big storm comes through and destroys the bridge. And he is furious. He's just enraged. He has all of the engineers executed because obviously in his mind they did not do a good job. Then he decides he is angry with the sea. So he sends his soldiers into the sea with whips to beat the sea. Then he says that's not enough. The sea has been very naughty. So he gets soldiers to heat up hot irons and plunge hot irons into the sea. He had anger management problems. He needed a class. This is the guy who is the king when Esther is the queen. Because see, Esther gets to be the queen because Artaxerxes is having a big party with all of the royalty and all his chief officials. They're having a big party time. They're drinking as much wine as they want out of the king's golden cups. So 7 days of drunkenness. Then the king gets the idea, it would be really cool to parade my beautiful wife in front of all these drunk guys. And Queen Vashti says, maybe you need to lay off the sauce because that ain't happening. No way. Well, think of who this guy is. He's the king. He's the emperor. And somebody's saying no to him. He flips out. He says Vashti's not going to be the queen anymore. And furthermore, there's going to be a law that wives all over the empire have to obey their husbands. And then somebody says to him, well, you're going to need a new queen. Why don't we have a beauty contest? And you could pick the most beautiful woman in the empire to be your new queen. So he sends guys out, they gather a whole bunch of women together, they get 400 women to come to the palace, and out of those 400, he picks Esther to be the new queen. Now, then what happens is this official in the king's court named Haman comes up to the king and says, I would really like to be the second in command and have everybody bow down to me when I come into the room. I've worked hard for you, king. Could we do that? And the king is feeling generous that day, so he signs the law. Everybody has to bow down to Haman. Well, this Jew, Mordecai, refuses to bow down to Haman. And the thing is I think sometimes we read back into it and say, well, he can't bow down. He's a Jew. Jews don't worship idols. But it doesn't say that in the story. It basically says, it basically just gives us the impression that Haman is being a big jerk, and Mordecai is like, no, I'm not going to bow down to this clown. And so he doesn't. And so Haman gets into his head that he's going to kill all of the Jews in the empire. And he gets the king to sign that decree. Now, Mordecai is Esther's older cousin. This decree gets signed, Mordecai finds out about it, and he's like, what are we going to do? And that's where we pick up the story in chapter 4. Puts on sackcloth, goes to the palace, and is saying to Esther, Esther, you got to do something about this. You've got to go and convince the king that he should not kill our people. And Esther says back, well, you know what the law is. The law is nobody goes to see the king without an invitation. If there's no invitation and you walk in there, you're dead. That's it. That's the rule. That's the law. He says maybe if the king is feeling particularly generous that day, he'll extend his golden scepter and you could live. But the king hasn't called me for 30 days. I'm not going in there. I mean, do you know this guy? This is the guy that sent guys to beat the sea. He's not exactly the most rational person on the planet. Mordecai says back to her, and this is interesting, I think. This is interesting to the story because Esther is the only book in the Bible where God is not mentioned. God does not show up in the book of Esther. The name of the Lord does not show up. And nobody prays in the book of Esther. So Mordecai says back to Esther, he doesn't say, the Lord is with you. He will deliver you and deliver our people. He doesn't say, I have prayed about this and the Lord has given me insight that he has appointed you to save the people. He doesn't say that. He doesn't say to Esther, you have a responsibility to your people under the laws of God. He doesn't say any of those things. He says, Esther, if this all goes down, you're not going to be safe. You and your family aren't going to be safe. You're Jews. You're not going to be safe. And you know what? Maybe, or actually, there will be deliverance from another place. But you and your family won't make it. So Mordecai doesn't apply to her sense of duty to the people. He doesn't invoke the power or grace of God. He says, this is down to self-preservation, Esther. You want to live, you got to take a chance. You want us to live, you got to take a chance. And she says, okay, I'll take a chance. She finds her courage and goes in to the king. And of course she gets spared. And she works the situation out. So Haman is the one that ends up getting killed. The people are saved. And there is great rejoicing. And it's still the celebration of this deliverance is to this day a Jewish holiday. Purim It's a holiday of Purim, usually in the wintertime. It's a happy, festive holiday because there was life out of a situation that seemed like guaranteed death. But here's the thing, is that it's not a story like deliverance at the Red Sea, where God shows up and splits the water. It's not a story of deliverance like in the desert, where God sends the manna, and it's clearly from God. This is a story where God is completely behind the scenes, where God isn't even mentioned, but God is still active. And I think that's the message of this book to us. Is sometimes it seems to us we don't see the Red Sea part. We don't see the manna come down from heaven. We don't see the dead coming back to life. We don't have a story in our lives like Dorcas, the faithful woman who cared for the poor who died, coming back to life. We don't see that. And we wonder, is God still at work? Is God still active? And the book of Esther says to us, even when you don't see it, even when you don't feel it, God is at work, and God is saving God's people, and God is redeeming you. Thanks be to God.